Ottawa has decided to relax its proposed carbon tax program. That's in an effort to help address Canada's competitiveness. Of course, a number of provinces have been very vocal about their opposition to the tax, including Saskatchewan. For more on the proposed carbon tax, we're now joined by Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. Premier, great to be able to be with you and get your thoughts and your reaction to the move from the federal government. What do you think?
Well, I think what we're seeing here today is most certainly an admission of something that we've been saying for a couple of years now. We've seen the federal government, along with groups such as the Eco-Fiscal Commission, say that a carbon tax would not have an impact on industries in our nation. And what we're seeing here today is an admission that most certainly a carbon tax would have an impact on our industries here in Saskatchewan, as well as across the nation of Canada, as we see the federal government starting to back up from applying this impact to our Canadian industry. So what we see here today is an admission of what we've been saying for the last 2 years.
Premier, is it enough?
No, this tax, it doesn't work. It doesn't reduce environmental outcomes in any way, shape, or form. But what it does reduce is jobs in our communities across the nation, as well as reduces the household income that we have in our family households across the nation. You know, a friend of mine told me this. He says, you know, poison is still poison when you water it down. What we're seeing here today is a watered down initiative of what is essentially economic poison in the nation of Canada. So it's not enough. This tax needs to be pulled back. The federal government would do well to go back to the Vancouver Declaration, where all First Ministers signed on behalf of their provinces, territories, the nation of Canada, to work collaboratively with different plans and provincial plans across our nation to achieve our Paris commitments. Not this made in Ottawa climate tax.
Premier, do you think that they're actually going to pull it back to zero, and/or allow the provinces to go ahead with their own climate plan like you have done?
I think that would be very wise advice, and I think the federal government should consider pulling it back to zero, rediscussing with the provinces the commitments that we made in the Vancouver Declaration, and taking into account the plans that have been put forward by provinces across the nation. The plan from Saskatchewan, which has real emissions reductions in it. Some of the plans that have been put forward by our Atlantic provinces that are looking to reduce emissions without a carbon tax in their jurisdictions. We have the province of Nova Scotia, for example, that has already achieved a 30% reduction, and that needs to be recognized.
Give us a few examples of what you've specifically done in your province to reduce emissions that could also be translated into other provinces as well.
Well, not only other provinces, but other nations and continents around the world, and most notably would be the largest public investment in any carbon mitigation effort ever in our nation is in carbon capture and storage at Boundary Dam 3. We have an agriculture industry in this province that through genetics and investment in crop genetics at the University of Saskatchewan, through investment in zero-till technology, has come from being essentially a carbon-emitting industry to a carbon-neutral industry in the course of the last 20 years. That needs to be recognized. We're now selling that technology, that innovation, to countries all around the world: Kazakhstan, Australia, the United States, Eastern Europe. We have a great story around innovation and investment in that innovation here in Saskatchewan, and I would put forward Canada that can have a real impact on what is a global challenge, as opposed to just having an impact within the borders of our province.
Is there anything the federal government could do, though, to win your support with this 20%?
They could back off on this carbon tax that is just so impactful to industry. That's been admitted here today. Re-engage with the provinces, understanding that the plans will look different across our nation. The economy in Saskatchewan is different than the manufacturing economy in Ottawa, in Ontario, pardon me, is different than the economies of Atlantic Canada, which again is different than the territorial economies or the economy in British Columbia. Each province is moving forward with credible plans. They should be recognized, and they should all be brought together to see where we can get to achieving our Paris Accord commitments that the federal government has made on our behalf. Saskatchewan has a credible plan. It's a plan of prairie resilience. It's a plan that we have worked on closely with the industry, and it's a plan that will have real emissions reductions, as opposed to a carbon tax that essentially will just chase jobs out of our province and our nation.
Premier, if in fact, the federal government doesn't pull it back to zero, as you suggest, and to re-engage in conversations and discussions about this, What will be next for your province from a court perspective, do you think?
Well, we'll see this through as we've already launched our reference case to the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal, and we'll see that through, and we'll be looking for a positive outcome from that. Aside from that, we continue to move forward with, as I said, our plan of prairie resilience, a climate change plan that will work for Saskatchewan industry and Saskatchewan people. You know, I would back up to what we've seen here today as well. What we've seen is a backup on the heavy emitter or the large corporation emissions that have been out there as far as what they're going to pay, but we see no backing up on what this is going to cost families across the nation. Families across the nation are still going to pay their 10 or 12 cents on their fuel tax, except in Saskatchewan and possibly Ontario, as we won't have that in our jurisdictions. But there's no backing up on what the cost will be to families, but there is a backing up to what the cost will be on our heavy emitters here today. It's an acknowledgement of the impact it'll have on our economy, and I would encourage the federal government to go the full stride and back it right up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem, even though it's a move perhaps in the right direction, it doesn't seem as though it's evenly applied or fairly applied to everybody, to your point about still affecting individuals across Canada.
It's a flawed policy. It's a policy that hasn't worked in other jurisdictions around the world, other nations around the world. I don't know why we think it would have any positive environmental outcome here in our nation. We asked the federal government, the previous Premier Brad Wall asked the federal government for an economic analysis on this carbon tax plan. To date, we're not aware of one that has been done, or most certainly one where the results of that plan have been released. So we again today would ask for, that economic plan to be put forward. We had an economic plan done at the University of Regina where we had come to the conclusion that the carbon tax in Saskatchewan would reduce emissions by less than 1% and cost the economy almost $2 billion a year.
Premier,
we have a better plan.
Premier, just lastly here, what are your conversations perhaps with Premier Ford surrounding this issue?
Our conversations are, how can we work together on a reference case that we have in the province of Saskatchewan before the Court of Appeal to ensure that we don't have this ineffective policy enacted not only on the people of Saskatchewan but also the people of Ontario. It's a policy that has no positive environmental outcomes and has a disastrous effect on the economy in both of our provinces, and I put forward in many other areas of the nation as well. Some areas it may work, in some areas, some consumption areas in Canada and provinces would be free to move forward as pricing as part of their plan. It does not work in an export-based economy such as Saskatchewan or obviously Ontario, as Ontarians have chosen to choose a government that isn't going to impose this.
I know we have to go, but speaking of the export market, do you think that it's had any kind of negative impact on the NAFTA renegotiations, our view of carbon taxing?
The NAFTA negotiations are in addition to some of the headwinds that we're facing. I'll speak from Saskatchewan's perspective with respect to the intended imposition of a carbon tax, as well as some other headwinds that we're facing with respect to getting our products to markets, not just in the U.S. But other markets around the world through pipelines, as well as over the rail.
All right, we have to leave it there. Premier, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That is Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan.